This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Manu Suvarna, and I am a research associate in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the National University of Singapore. To begin with, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me and my team a chance to present our work at this conference. I would now like to wait for a minute so that the audience interested in attending this talk can just settle in. Thank you. Hey, hope you're all settled in. Once again, welcome everybody to my presentation. My name is Manu Suvarna, and I am a research associate at the National University of Singapore. And this is the topic of my presentation, that is applied machine learning for prediction of biochar properties and its various applications. This is the brief outline of my work. I'll begin with an introduction, and which also covers the motivation of our study. Then I will walk you all through two of our works in which I have described both the methodology and the results and the conclusions, followed by the future directions of our research. Okay, so the first thing to describe here is much of our work in our group is along the lines of developing machine learning models to understand how wet waste, which could be in the form of food waste or sludge or manure, can be eventually used as a source of energy in the form of char. If it is derived from normal combustion, it is just biochar. If it is through pyrolysis, then we have termed it as pyrochar. And if it is from hydrothermal carbonization, then we have termed it as hydrochar. In each of the case, the essence is that these chars are a powerful source of energy. And the main motivation in our research is to identify how the feedstock and the thermochemical process parameters affect the production of these chars, which are then eventually used or which can be used for producing energy. So this is a framework that we developed and worked. And in fact, we also published this paper earlier this year. So this is our machine learning framework. What we have is we have sourced the elementary composition as well as the proximate analysis of various feedstocks from literature, as well as the process parameters, which could be in terms of the temperatures, the residence time, and so on. And for two types of process, which is hydrothermal carbonization and for pyrolysis. And we have used this data to develop machine learning models to help us predict the yield, the HHV, which is the high heating value, the energy recovery, and the energy density of the biochar, which is in the case of HTC, we have termed it as hydrochar, and in the case of pyrolysis, we have termed it as pyrochar. So these are technically our target variables, whereas these, the elementary composition, the process parameters, the proximate analysis, all are included as our input variables. So we develop prediction models, and then we also analyze how these input features rank in their impact in making this prediction. And these kind of analysis also help us in estimating what is the significance of each of these individual parameters on the production process, and which ultimately determines the yield or the heating value or the energy recovery and density of the biochar that is produced. So following The first step, as I did mention, is all the data collection process. We sourced uh, 64 papers and had about 300 data points to build our model. And even before building our model, what we tried was to do a descriptive analysis of all our input and input features and target features. So you can see over here, we have all the composition analysis done. This is just a basic descriptive analysis of the compositional features. You can see the elemental composition here. These plots are for the process parameters. H is all for hydrothermal carbonization, whereas P is for pyrolysis. So we have the temperature, we had the heating rate, and then we have the water content. In this case, we have the heating rate. In pyrolysis, we have the pyrolysis temperature, as well as the pyrolysis time and the heating rate. And on the target variables, we also analyzed how the yield varies with respect to the energy recovery, some basic compositional analysis of the charts, which could be oxygen by carbon ratio and hydrogen by carbon ratio, and also the heating values with respect to ED, which is energy density. So before developing the machine learning models, we performed descriptive analysis just to get more insights on our data. And once we had both these steps done, what we then went on was to identify the most suitable machine learning algorithms that we could use to develop our models. In our case, because we had a data set of roughly about 300 data points, we thought to use the classical machine learning models, including support vector regression, as well as random forest in our case, to develop the models. In each of the case, what we did was we had developed a data set and split it into 80-20 ratio, wherein 80 belonged to the training data and 20 belonged to the test data. This was inclusive for both SVR as well as for the random forest model. And then on the training model, what we did was we developed, in fact, just for cross-validation purpose, we randomly selected 2/3 of the training data as bagging data set, and then the rest 1/3 was out of bag data set. And then this was just the case for random forest. And in the case of the support vector regression, we used the hyperparameters like the RBF function, the linear function, as well as its loss function and epsilon functions to tune the model such that the errors or the cost function, which is in our case, our target variables, are matched. That is, the deviation between the actual values and the predicted values is to a minimum. So you can see that here in, so this is the hyperparameter tuning. In the case of random forest, we varied the number of trees and the maximum number of depths. And then in the case of support vector regression, we tuned the hyperparameters with respect to either the linear function or the poly function and the RBF function. So in our model, what we realized that it was the support vector regression which gave us better prediction as compared to the random forest model. For brevity in time, I have not showcased the random forest model. But in a nutshell, for each of the parameters that was tested, that is the yield, the HHV, the energy recovery, and the energy density, for both A is hydrochar and B is pyrochar, the support vector regression had a prediction value with an R square greater than 0.95 on the training data and more than 0.9 on the test data, showing its robustness for the prediction. Apart from this, we also carried out feature analysis using Shapley. I have avoided that for brevity in time, but in a nutshell, what we observed was that in both the case of hydrochar and pyrochar, it was the the temperature, the process temperature that had a great impact on each of these process parameters, followed by the carbon content and the hydrogen content. So that was the first part of our work. The second work that we are involved deals with the inverse design of biochar for determining predetermined the CO2 absorption capacities. In this work, what we did was we also sourced experimental data, which had the input variables, including the textural properties of the biochar, compositional properties of the biochar, and the adsorption parameters, which are basically the temperature and the pressure at which adsorption takes place, and corresponding to which we had the amount of CO2 absorbed by the biochar. So we use this data to develop machine learning models so that we could predict the CO2 based on these input features. And this was the first phase of this second work that I'm describing now. And what we observed was that in this case, the textural properties, which include the surface area and the pore volumes of the biochar, were more important than the compositional features. And once we realized that the textural properties were uh, integral to determining the CO2 adsorption, we took a step further to see if we could determine what were the best process parameters to help us develop biochars with certain CO2, or sorry, with certain surface area, which could then be used for effectively capturing the CO2. So in this case, what we did was we used the pyrolysis parameters and the surface activation parameters to uh, develop predictive models so that they could predict the textural properties, which is the surface area. This work has been ongoing, and I'll quickly show the results of what we have so far. So on the first case, we tried to predict the CO2 adsorption on the biochar. And what we have here is a predictive model. We tried several models, of which we found out that uh, the XGB boost model gave us the highest predictive performance. We could score a test R square of close to 0.77 in this case. And if you see the feature importance plot, and this is where we realized that the surface area and components, including the total pore volume and the micropore volume, were significant in determining the CO2 adsorption by itself. Further on, with the existing data that we had, we tried to develop classification models which could help us classify the biochar based on their surface area range, given the input features like, as I did mention over here, which is the pyrolysis parameters and the surface activation. And in this phase two, we have been able to predict the values of our model pretty well, with the XGBoost modeling, with the XGBoost model performing the best so far. So we have the the different ranges of surface area, and based on our data set, we have been able to classify them pretty accurately to roughly about, as I did mention, an R square of 0.78, approximately around zero point 0.8, with an accuracy of 0.8. So this whole work is along the lines of developing an experimental data set and deriving insights on the predictive models for CO2 adsorption using a set of textural composition adsorption parameters. And once this was done, we then developed some classification models for predicting biochar with certain range of surface area using the upstream process parameters. Further on from here, what we aim to develop is to use this information to develop a knowledge hub, which could be an optimization or a rule-based decision support system for guided synthesis, which will be eventually used by our experimental collaborators to validate our model and then put this model in the loop and continue this inverse design of biochar so that we can ultimately come up with biochar with predetermined CO2 capacities. And just to add on this step, what we aim to do is to develop a Bayesian optimization framework for the synthesis of biochar. And eventually, the Bayesian optimization rule-based model will be used by our experimental collaborators to help them in their synthesis process. So this is a brief overview of our work, which mainly involves the application of machine learning. And we have uh, been working on this with respect to development of or development as well as the analysis of uh, properties of pyrochar and hydrochar. And the current ongoing work is purely on biochar. And this is an exciting work that keeps our group members as well as myself pretty motivated. And we hope to develop and design more of such works going forward. I thank you all for your attention and interest in my talk. If you have any questions, any suggestions, or any more interest to discuss this topic, please feel free to write to me or email me. All my details are present on the first slide. I thank you all once again for your kind attention, and the organizers for giving us an opportunity to present. Thank you very much.